Welcome back to the Senior Savvy Cannabis podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Goldberg. Today, we have a special guest, Joyce Gerber. Joyce is the CannaMom. She has a podcast about cannabis, and we are here to listen to her story. And I'm very thankful that you're joining us, Joyce. And are you the CannaMom? Is the CannaMom a philosophy? Who's the CannaMom? What's the CannaMom about?
Well, first, thank you for having me today. This is great. I'm out on the East Coast, so hopefully some people out here are listening as well. Um, we talked about this a little bit earlier, very traditional. I play tennis, I wear pearls. I'm almost 60 years old. I have two kids who are grown. I'm a lawyer by training, and cannabis was not really my natural habitat ever. I am not the Canna Mom. It's called the CannaMom Show, intentionally like the Daily Show, and was literally started because I thought I would make money in cannabis. And if you're in cannabis, you know I'm saying. But I've turned into an advocate. I started at it was a podcast production company, I guess, was really how I started in cannabis. And I kind of came from there. We created the show there. So it's the CannaMom Show. It's more of a philosophy. We talk about crushing the stigma around cannabis and caregivers specifically. You know, I am a mom, but I've also had to take care of my own mother. And we are talking about seniors in a way. I am almost a senior, but how this can really be beneficial for people who are caregivers on both ends, and that there's so much stigma around it. We're often denied even access to it. So I will say I was not a cannabis consumer when my children were little. I probably should have been. I, I would have liked them better. I would have been calmer. And the truth is, you know, I was very stressed. I was a divorce attorney for many years, and my children were little, and there was a lot of stuff going on, and I could drink. I could literally yell across my office, "I'm stopping at the Packy." Anyone not from Massachusetts at the liquor store? I'm stopping at the Packy on the way home. And then I'll be like, of course you are. And if I walked into my daycare and picked up my kids and said I just have a bottle of wine in the car, they would all be like, of course. I could wear a wine mom shirt. But if I had walked in and smelled like cannabis, or even made the gesture that I was going to smoke cannabis around my children, I mean, I was actually in the family law business. I probably would have arrested myself. So this is a big headspace for me to shift into, for someone to come from believing it was killing brain cells and so dangerous you deserve to go to jail, to being like, no, no, no. This is something that we all could use because honestly, we don't have to feel shitty all the time. And this is a tool to help you achieve that goal. So that's sort of my mantra. And I could talk more about how I got into it specifically if you care.
I love I love the wisdom behind it. I love, this plant has been used medicinally for over 5,000 years to help people not feel as shitty. So the fact that we're in the 21st century in America using this plant is amazing. What was there one turning point where something clicked in your head where you said maybe cannabis could be a part of my life, or was it over the course of many years that there were small turning points? How did you get from point A to point B?
So I say I had a cannabis awakening in 2016 in Denver, Colorado, where I think many people have cannabis awakenings. I had gone out my husband and I went to travel just for fun. My children were old enough not to go with us, so we decided we knew it was legal 2016, and I set up a tour with a woman named Goldie Soledar. She had a great little business called City Sessions, who gave us a tour of the industry, and it changed exactly what I thought it was. So she took us to a dispensary, obviously. I could see what that looked like, but she also took us to a grow facility. You know, and this is highly regulated, people. This is the most regulated industry, specifically for growing and how you maintain your industry, not to mention the sucky way you have to handle a business. And there's a lot you have to be a smart person to handle all the minutia of this. So I went into this facility and I saw for the first time that they were not a bunch of stoners sitting on their couch eating Cheetos, growing pot. This was an industry, this was a business, you know. And then the woman who gave us the tour, she told us a little about the history. You know, I think there's 10,000 years of cannabis history, and we literally live in the 100-year anomaly. You know, that this belief set was brought on by, and I hate conspiracy theories, but it was intentional and it was with malice. Anyway, so we are the anomaly. Anyway, so that was my cannabis awakening. That was 2016. My kids were teenagers at the time. So the joke in my family is I came home, I sat them down, I'm like, kids, everything I know about pot is wrong. They were like, okay. And it was just like this thing. I didn't expect to go to the, I didn't, I was working as a attorney. I mean, I wasn't planning on going into the industry. I just could see that this was something that I knew was wrong and they were teenagers and I'm pretty sure they were using it. Anyway, so that was sort of a weird conversation. 2016 was also the same year, Massachusetts, the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We had a question on the ballot and we voted in cannabis legalization in the state, which really surprised me, honestly, because I've lived here my whole life and I had no idea that was where we were heading. And then the third thing that happened was in 2016, at the end of the year, a contract position I was working on ended. And then I was just having a hard time getting a job. I mean, that is the truth of it. I am an attorney. I do have kids. I was one of those women, I don't know how old you are, but I was one of those women who was told we should do it all. Sheryl Sandberg said to lean in. It was the stupidest advice I ever heard. I was leaning in. I had my kids, I had my marriage. It wasn't going so well. And the thing that I gave up on, honestly, instead of giving up on myself, is I gave up on my professional life, which isn't the smartest thing to do, but I couldn't figure out how to balance it all. And it felt really shitty at the time. And that's a whole nother story of my life. But because I had done that, I was in and out of the world of monetized work so often. My resume looked crazy. I did everything from like family law to working as I worked embroidery machine at a printmaker. And I ran for a political
Incredible.
office. I admit I did a lot of random things in between, but by the time you're in your 40s or 50s and your resume looks a certain way, people don't want to hire you. So I was sort of spinning around and having a hard time finding work. But I could see that law firms were literally setting up cannabis divisions. Like this was new law. Like you never, ever, ever get to be part of something new. So that was sort of the spark of the idea, kind of like coming together. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll go into cannabis law. It's like business. And I talked to a bunch of criminal law attorneys who are now coming into it because those are their clients. And I could see there were women's issues and I did work in family law. So what I did was really I took time. It took about a year to figure out even what this industry was. I had to learn some of the history like we talk about, just to even know I really was ignorant. And just it's kind of amazing once you know why this isn't accessible to people. It's kind of frustrating. Anyway, so 2006, 2018, I think. 2018, I went to a conference, a cannabis conference, and I met somebody who had a cannabis he was starting a cannabis podcast production company. I didn't really know that much about cannabis. I didn't know that much about production. I didn't know anything about podcasting. I literally get a newspaper delivered to my house, whatever. But we had a connection and he hired me as his executive producer. So I did that for a year. I was an executive producer for a cannabis podcast, which meant I was bringing guests. So I was learning the industry. It was like getting your master's degree, just like bringing on people, the business people, the nurses, the um, I don't know, growers, the man. What is like a lot of this is it. Cannabis is like the real world, a little upside down because of all our special rules, but we have everything everyone else has. So I was meeting all these people who are in the industry, and then in 2019, I was in the studio with a friend, and we were talking about how you talk to your kids in this new era of cannabis. That was sort of how this started. My kids were older, hers were younger. The guys in the studio were like, oh, why don't we do like a beta test, see if this would work as a podcast? So it just started with me and her. And then she was, it was still in the era when people were like nervous and didn't want to talk about it. So she didn't want to be doing it. And I'm like, I'll do it. So they want to call me the CannaMom, which was like literally absurd. So the CannaMom Show is like the Daily Show. It's a talk show. So the idea is to bring on women in the industry, moms, caregivers, to talk about how they utilize it in their lives and how they function as business owners. Because these women, they're not just functioning, they're excelling.
Incredible, incredible. And so I love how small and niche this industry is because we have to give my friend Goldie a major shout out. I love
Oh,
Goldie. Goldie has been in the industry for so long, doing such incredible work with her tour company in Denver. And she even put together a little book. So it was like a coupon book.
yeah.
So if you went on her tour, you got like a coupon book and you could go all around the city and get great deals. And it was brilliant. So shout out to Goldie for
That's
inspiring.
funny.
Yeah.
And I
I
did reach out to her. So when I was talking about this, I reached out to her and she said to connect with it wasn't Women Grow. I forget I think it's what it was called at the time, to
yeah.
connect. Yeah. And then that's kind of how I started meeting women because I'm in Massachusetts. It's very nichey and it's very state specific. So that's how I started meeting women in Massachusetts. And even when I started doing the podcast in 2019, um, I was actually interviewing more people in Colorado and California just because there are people established were out there. And then as the podcast, we've done it for 5 years. And as it progressed, I focused a little bit more on New England.
Cool, cool. So tell me a little bit about the stories that you heard doing the podcast, especially the stories from maybe people like in your position as well, where they were taking care of aging parents. They were, trying to keep their family together with teenagers and a partner, and they were working. Can you tell me about like how those women talked about their cannabis experience and maybe paint a before and after picture for us?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say almost universally, these stories are women who have been evangelized because they found it, they've healed either themselves or someone they love using this plant medicine, usually after desperate situations where they find it as a last resort, which is the thing they're trying to fix. Like these are literally women out there being like, this is a thing that happened to me. I now know this. This shouldn't happen to anyone else. And they're out there talking about it. So there's a pretty famous woman in our industry, Nikki Lowley. She had a brain injury, and she talked a lot about how, again, very traditional from upstate New York. There's no way she was going to be smoking pot until she got to the point where she was literally suicidal. So, there's those are kind of universal stories of like maybe not that bad, but they get to the end of their ropes and they find cannabis as the last resort. And we want to be out there and saying, I talk like it heals everything. I know it doesn't, but I do know that it should be part of the toolbox because, I mean, again, I was offered, you can have like cannabis. I mean, you can have like alcohol. I could have taken a lot of pharmaceuticals. I could have suffered, but no one in my era would have ever offered me cannabis as a solution. So those are kind of stories. And then you hear about the children, because there's a lot of like, I've heard quite a few parents of autistic children, again, who have found it out of desperation. I mean, these stories are becoming more and more common, but the really early stories were really desperation. They were like had to be um, like bandits trying to find this medicine and crossing state lines. And, it just should be part of our toolbox of medical solutions. So those are kind of the stories I'm hearing, and then once they become evangelized, they're using whatever skill set they have. If they're marketers, they go into marketing sometimes, if they have a product idea or healthcare, the healthcare people are really they're my heroes right now because the healthcare industry does not talk about the endocannabinoid system. I have a doctor out here named Dr. Kaplan. I don't know if his cannabis handbook, he actually just sent it to me.
Oh, nice. Maybe we can have him on the podcast.
Yeah, so he talks and he's trying to like connect with medical people. So
the it's interesting. What I hear from people is that when they talk to their doctors, the doctors seem very enthusiastic that they're getting positive results from it. And at the same time, the doctors can't endorse it.
yeah, and that's exactly the issue we're having is that, we know this could work for people, but you're getting your medical information from your bud tender. That's not really right. And again, I don't know anything about the human body. I'm a lawyer. I literally have, I don't know how anything works. But there are systems in our body that interact with the endocannabinoid system that medical professionals understand, and they can understand the nuance of it, especially for people like seniors, if we want to get back to seniors. So my own mother's story is she was convinced I was in a drug cartel to the day she passed. She did not believe in this, but I used to she was in an independent living facility, and I would bring a lot of like CBD creams or things that I would leave them for her and I would give them to her friends because they would use the CBD cream or something that was a good product and they wouldn't have any pain. And then they would ask me for something else. Like that's kind of how I indoctrinated my senior mom friends, but my mother wasn't into it. But she was also very nervous about how it would interact with her other medications, which is a huge issue for seniors. And I did have a cannabis nurse do a consultation with her and did have some information because sometimes you actually can titrate down on your medications if you're using cannabis, which again is really good information to know, for people who are taking several or for doctors to understand if they're going to include this in, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in senior centers who are popping gummies and doing stuff and not telling their doctors now. And even if they told their doctors, just like you said, the doctor doesn't know what to do. So, yeah, I forget where this is going. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of the interaction with, medications is a big deal for seniors. And my own mother was like a big example of that. And it was frustrating because I couldn't convince her that it could help her. And I always hear those miracle stories of helping people at end of life, and I couldn't do it.
It sounds like you helped her friends.
I did. I helped a lot of other people.
And she witnessed that. You can only you can only go so far. Like we're not allowed to, pry open our parents' mouths and shove gummies down. Like
Although I will say I took her, she was, this is true. So my mother, um, I used to do the podcast in a studio, but then after the pandemic, I ended up doing it in my house, obviously. But the last day I was in the studio, saw my mother and she wanted to come to work with me. I don't know, she just wanted to hang out with me that day. So I brought her to the studio and my guest that day actually canceled because it was the beginning of the pandemic and everyone was freaking out. It was like March 2020. Anyway, so my producer convinced my mother to put the headphones on. So my last show I had recorded is with my mother, and we never talk about cannabis really. So with some funny stories. And then I actually took her to a dispensary afterwards, and they let her tour the grow facility, and she still didn't believe anything I said. But I have a really good interview with her, and I'm so grateful for it. So
that's incredible. What an incredible keepsake. Back it, I mean, do a double backup of that. You just want to.
it's on YouTube. You can find it.
Okay,
I put it out every year. The Nana. Yeah. So again,
Hannah.
it's
Okay.
it's hard to change people's minds. I understand. We believe things for a reason. My mother believed things for a certain reason. I believe things for a certain reason. And often the only way people change on cannabis really is when someone they love or themselves use it and they find that it's not what they thought it was. It's like personal experience over and over again. That seems to be the most productive, effective way to change people's minds about what this is.
I agree completely. And just to kind of dive into that a little bit more with because this resonates so much, on all fronts. When we're talking about people like your age that aren't seniors yet, um, how how does the message spread in your age group? Like, I imagine, like on occasion, you're going out for coffee with your girlfriends, or you're doing you're playing mahjong or whatever. Does the conversation happen in those environments, or like, I mean, where before you could shout it from the rooftops, where did you feel safe bringing up this topic in front of new people your own age?
Um, I mean, I don't think I ever talked to, I mean, if I smoke, this is the truth. Like when I smoked pot back in the day, especially when my kids were little, like my friend would get it. And I don't even know, we get like a little bit. I don't know where we got it from. Somebody knew somebody, and then we would smoke it like at somebody's beach house. Like we wouldn't do it in the house, but with the children around, we would go away, we would smoke our pot and we'd feel good. You know what I mean? And then drink our wine. And it was just like kind of a head game. And I'm like, why we were I'm so brainwashed to believe that feeling good like that is not as good as feeling drunk good. Do you know what I mean? It's like a weird anyway, so no, we didn't talk about it. I had a couple of friends who would smoke like when my kids were little, but it wasn't like it wasn't something we talked about.
Totally, totally. What about now?
Oh, well, I mean, I have a podcast and like I'm like again, I'm a very traditional human being. I sit on the board at my temple, and
Nice.
when I got on the board, the temple's like, "Ooh," the rabbi said, "Oh, it's gonna be fun to have Joyce on the board this year."
I love it. When I first moved to Los Angeles, I wanted to make friends, and I love Judaism, so I hosted Pot Shabbat.
Mm.
Um, and it was before the pandemic, and it was such a fun. This was the sign I needed to reach out to my rabbi to compliment her on something, and then to suggest that maybe I give a little talk,
Yeah.
because that's the thing, especially with the seniors. It's it's the lotions to
Yep.
alleviate the arthritis, and then they're moving around, and because of that, their quality of life is better. And then it's the rest of the adults who are taking, let's say, a soft gel or a tincture or even a gummy and going about their day and not being weighed down by the pain they didn't even realize was created by the biochemistry in their body. And this isn't a science podcast, even though I love science with all my heart. But it's pretty amazing that the same plant in various forms can help alleviate so many different issues. And I'm not saying that it's going to fix everything. I agree. I have been told that it sounds like I have said in the past that it will fix everything. But like you said, it's part of a toolkit. If you're not using cannabis mindfully and you're not living a healthy lifestyle, no matter no matter how much of the plant you use, your mind and your body aren't going to change. Things have to be in place for that to happen.
It's
Um,
it's the balance. It's I do believe about the balance that again, one of the things that cannabis helped for me is I'm a very type A anxious person. I went through law school and I was pregnant, so I took the bar pregnant. Like I'm crazy. But I didn't, cannabis has calmed me down. And again, even coming back to my kids, again, I was a very anxious parent and there was no reason for me to actually be that way. That was my personality. But I could have used cannabis and sat on the floor with them. I mean, it actually makes me feel sad. I could have been able to sit more calmly with them. I would have been able to be like a little bit more fun. My kids had everything they ever needed. They're fine. They're great kids, the whole thing. But I just could have enjoyed it more. And that's sort of the thing when you have a certain personality, if you're a little bit depressed or if you have a lot of pain or whatever it is, you're not functioning at your best. And there's no reason for people to suffer through that. I mean, that is, I think, the message I keep trying to get through to people is we just get used to it. You just get used to feeling, especially women my age or the women who are younger with the kids, you just get used to feeling anxious and uncomfortable and just like I don't know, having to take care of yourself, your children, your husband, your job, whatever it is, and still kind of look good takes a toll on you. And if you are just able to take 5 minutes to yourself, which is so hard to do when you're in that mindset, to sit back and like smoke a joint and just sit for 5 or 10 minutes, that is so good for your brain. And then it makes you more productive and more able to deal with the shit that's coming at you all day. You know what I mean? But when you're very anxious, you just never give yourself that grace, I think.
that's so insightful.
Yeah.
If that's the message that people take away from this podcast, I know that we'll have done something good. Um, and people of all ages don't realize that we've been living in a fight or flight state for our entire lives with very little break from that. And
Hmm.
once you have that experience of your body regulating itself and the voice inside your head shutting up for a fraction of a second, you say, oh, there are different ways to feel. I'm not locked into this one thing.
Yeah.
Um, and having that ability to pivot and change your perspective, which I think is really what cannabis is all about, no
Yeah.
matter what form you take it in, all the forms are good. Maybe we'll even invent new forms in the future. Great. But I think that really is the core of why people like us are so passionate. And so I'm not a type A person, but when it comes to helping older people or pets live in less pain, I am yelling it from the rooftop.
Yeah.
Uh, so this was a fabulous conversation. I
We're
like,
talking. I can talk forever about this. It's like no one wants to talk to me about it anymore. Whatever it is. I've talked to hundreds of women from around the world, really across the country. I did a really interesting interview um, with a woman from Israel last year. She was on Near Oz, one of the communities that was attacked on October 7th. But they were, cannabis is a Israel is one of the few countries in the world where cannabis is used medically and people grow it specifically for certain strains to help people. And on Near Oz, they had strains that were being grown. And she talked about one of her growers was trying to save some of the cannabis plants and was kidnapped, one of the kidnapped people. It was a really sad interview. She was actually in Germany, and as a Jewish person, to think that she felt safer in Germany than she did in Israel is, I don't know, it was sad. Yeah.
wow. That
I've talked to women from around the world, literally around the world, across the country, who are doing this thing because just like you, I don't know, these are the stories that need to be shared. That's how we change people's hearts and minds. I mean, stories are the most powerful way, as a Jew, we have one story. Stories are what change hearts and minds. It was a story created to make us believe this thing. It was a story, and a lot of people played in on it. And I talk a lot about culture. You know, me talking about it, you talking about it. Just seeing that whatever we are, we represent something that people don't understand what cannabis is, and that they can have access to this too. You don't have to be high. That's why people always worry about. I want to be high, and I think what they mean is I don't want to be out of control. I actually don't know what they mean. But if my friend used to say, do you want to feel happy, insightful, grateful, and hopeful? Yeah.
then we have the
And
screen for you
we have
and
this thing
all
for
of
you.
that.
Yeah. So, whatever it is with cannabis, it's not scary. It shouldn't be scary. You shouldn't be afraid of it. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. If you can control yourself, if you can control your own internal world, we can help each other better. I do believe that from my soul, honestly. 'Cause there's so much stuff going on in the world. I can't control any of it, but I can control how I react to things. And I would say I wasn't able to control myself as well as before I had cannabis, because I sit and I talk to my husband now. Like, we're not that frantic people anymore. Like, we relax, we spend time together. We were a cannabis friendly household during the pandemic. My kids came home. We all got along really nicely. There was no alcohol craziness. We were just a little bit high all the time and we were fine.
Amazing. Amazing. Well,
Yeah,
this
that's
this was the
it.
story we needed. I think Zoom is about to cut us off because I
Oh,
have a free trial.
oh,
Um,
you have 9 minutes, I think.
oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, okay. Then I can breathe. Okay.
Okay. Breathe. You don't like kick me off yet. Okay.
Um,
Yeah. But the senior stuff I think is so important, and like getting access to it and just having people like you talk to them is really important. I think that's great what you're doing.
absolutely. I think it's, one story at a time. And like you said, even if you can't get the people closest to you to get the memo, you get their friends, you start to alleviate suffering. They see, things change.
It's hard to convince people who know you. I think that's the truth of it.
It's got to come from someone else.
Yeah, it has to come from outside, because I've heard a lot of these stories about people who couldn't like help their own. Like, I had a friend whose mother disinherited her when she said she was going to go from doing oncology nursing to cannabis nursing, and then she heard a story from like a nun who used cannabis and inherited her back in. But this is something, again, psychologically in our heads.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Um,
yeah.
well, I love it. Thank you, Joyce. This was so much fun.
That's
And
funny. That's funny, Goldie.
I know, it's so funny.
I used to call this my new JCC, my Jewish Cannabis Connection.
There are a lot of us.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, oh yeah.
there are a
Well,
lot.
I did I was an MJ BizCon last year, and we did a Jews and Weed meetup.
Yeah, with Ben
Yeah,
C
yeah, yeah,
or whatever his name is.
yeah. So
Do you know Shipra?
no,
Okay, Shipra runs Mitzvah Herbal,
I
and
know that.
they do kosher gummies. But she was like one of those moms who has a nonverbal autistic child who had a cookie with weed in it and
Right.
was able to say "I love you" for the first
Yeah.
time. Like that's the
Those,
end of it. That's why we're doing this.
yeah, the stories of those moms. It's really tricky for those kids. And what they go through to get the kids their medicine is insane, but they do it, right? Yeah.
They do it. Yeah. So you know what? Like, yeah, the future is not the past.
Yeah.
I think we're onto something.
The thing I do talk a lot about with moms, this is the big thing now, is that, it is legal here in Massachusetts, and women are still having, children family services is still being involved if you have cannabis. They're still trying to test you. It's like, this seems like an issue that could be fixed pretty easily. I don't know what the deal is, but hospitals shouldn't be testing. Unless there's a concern for abuse, no one should be testing for cannabis anywhere, ever.